Okay, so we spend a lot of time thinking about growth, right? Especially, in a Christian context.
Yeah, definitely.
But how often do we actually zoom out and look at the where is growth happening? And maybe more importantly, where isn't it?
Hmm.
It's about getting this strategic view, like understanding a discipleship terrain maybe, instead of just, hoping things work out.
Exactly. And our sources this time, they really lean into this strategic discipleship, but they use this term geographic wisdom.
Geographic wisdom, okay.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. It feels much more intentional than just sort of casting a wide net and hoping for the best.
Yeah. Right, avoiding that spray and pray thing.
Huh.
So for this deep dive, our mission really is to get a handle on how this geographic viewpoint can actually sharpen our discipleship efforts. We want to uncover maybe some of those deeper obstacles, the ones you don't always see, and crucially, give you some practical steps, things you can actually use.
Get those aha moments.
Exactly, those aha moments, but without being totally overwhelming. Okay, so where do we start unpacking this discipleship terrain idea?
Well, let's start with something that's maybe surprisingly there in the Bible all along.
Yeah.
Geography itself.
Okay.
It's easy to miss, maybe.
Yeah.
But Scripture is constantly highlighting specific places. I mean, think about God's promise to Abraham. It wasn't just some vague blessing, right?
No, it was tied to a specific land, the Promised Land.
Exactly, the Promised Land. And the whole Exodus story, I mean, that's fundamentally a journey through places for a specific reason, not just random wandering.
Yeah, definitely not random.
And then you look at the prophets, they weren't just talking abstractly. They were calling out specific nations, specific cities,
Yeah.
Holding them accountable in their actual places.
Right.
Even Jesus' ministry, which our sources point out was largely focused, Galilee, Judea. That wasn't accidental either.
Yeah.
It suggests a very deliberate regional focus.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. Acts. The book of Acts is basically the story of the gospel spreading geographically, right?
Totally. It's like a map unfolding. Acts 1.8 kind of gives you the strategy. Jerusalem, then Judea and Samaria, then bam, the ends of the earth.
Clear progression.
Absolutely. It just hammers home how important place is in God's plan. And even, way at the end in Revelation, a new heaven and new earth, a specific restored place where God lives with people.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's more than just Bible geography trivia, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The main point from all this biblical stuff is that context. It just profoundly matters. God seems to have specific intentions for different places, different people groups. So understanding that context is, essential for doing discipleship well.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got the where. Now let's maybe dig into the why. Why might things not be growing like we'd hope in certain spots? The sources talk about identifying these deeper roadblocks, stuff beyond the surface.
Yeah, and some of these are quite profound. One concept they discuss is spiritual strongholds, sometimes linked with territorial spirits. This comes from passages like Ephesians 6 or Daniel 10.
Okay, how should we think about that in this context?
Well, maybe think of a stronghold as like an area or even a collective mindset in a place that seems especially resistant to the gospel message or just resistant to spiritual growth in general. It's less about seeing demons everywhere and more about acknowledging that, real spiritual opposition can sometimes be concentrated or particularly strong in certain contexts, hindering things.
That's a heavy idea. But then there are also really concrete barriers, right? Like systemic injustice and oppression.
Oh, absolutely. Things like poverty, deep inequality. They aren't just social issues. They can be massive hurdles for people just having the bandwidth, the capacity to even think about spiritual things.
Yeah, if you're just trying to survive.
Exactly. Your focus is elsewhere, understandably.
Yeah.
So the sources argue that tackling these injustices isn't just like social work. It's actually part of creating an environment where discipleship can even happen, let alone flourish.
And then there's the whole complex thing of cultural idolatry and worldview conflicts. That feels super relevant today.
Definitely. It's about those really deep-seated beliefs or values in a culture that might fundamentally clash with a biblical worldview.
So you can't just drop a message in without understanding that.
Not effectively, no.
Yeah.
You absolutely have to understand that cultural framework to contextualize the message so it can actually be heard and understood. Makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Another big one they mentioned is the lack of indigenous leadership. That just seems like common sense almost.
Right. The leadership isn't coming from within that local culture. You risk creating dependency. You don't get that real long-term ownership of the discipleship efforts. Sustainability is the key word.
Because local leaders just get it. The nuances, the culture.
Precisely. They have an intuitive grasp that outsiders often struggle to gain fully.
And the last one here is fragmented networks and lack of collaboration, it sounds like. Like everyone's doing their own thing in isolation.
Pretty much. Lots of good efforts, maybe, but they're siloed.
Yeah.
So you miss chances to share resources, learn from each other, and ultimately have a much bigger impact together.
Yeah, you lose that synergy. Okay, so we've named some pretty big obstacles. Let's get practical. The sources lay out this step-by-step plan. I like how they break it down with these micro wins. Makes it feel, doable.
Yeah, that's the idea. Strategic, but achievable. So phase one source calls it the comprehensive terrain map, another calls it the terrain sketch. But basically, it's about really deepening your understanding of the specific area you care about, moving from fuzzy ideas to actual information.
Okay, so micro-win, #1 in that first approach is gathering demographic data, like population density, age groups, income, religious affiliation, stuff you can often find publicly available.
Right. It gets you past just assumptions or stories. You get a real data-driven picture of who's actually in your area of focus.
Then micro-win, #2 is a spiritual audit. Looking at, how many churches are there? What's the general level of religious activity? Who are the spiritual leaders? Kind of assessing the existing spiritual landscape.
Yeah, seeing where there's already activity and maybe where there are noticeable gaps.
And micro-win, #3 is identifying key cultural influencers and gatekeepers, the people who really shape opinions or control access in the community.
Crucial step. These folks can be huge allies or significant roadblocks. You need to know who they are and understand their perspective.
Now, the other source frames phase 1 a bit differently with the terrain sketch. Their micro-win, #1, is literally just sketching a rough map of your area. It doesn't have to be perfect geography, more conceptual.
Right. Sometimes that's a more intuitive place to start. Just visualizing the key communities or neighborhoods you're thinking about.
Then their micro-win, #2, is marking, say, 3 to 5 discipleship strongholds. On that map, places where you see healthy churches, good leadership, real community engagement.
At the right spots.
And micro-win, #3 is the flip side, marking 3 to 5 discipleship deserts, areas where there's maybe a real lack of resources or spiritual apathy, maybe even opposition. I find that contrast really stark and helpful up front.
It gives you that immediate visual, doesn't it? The
Yeah.
disparities, the different levels of spiritual vitality across your terrain.
And threading through both versions of phase 1 is this emphasis on value alignment, constantly remembering God loves every single person, every single place on this map. And they offer these affirmations too, things like, I am a steward of God's creation, committed to reaching every people group, or I am a strategic thinker, committed to reaching those far from God. Those feel like really important mental anchors.
Absolutely. They keep you grounded in the why behind all this strategic thinking.
Yeah.
What's the ultimate purpose?
Okay, phase 2, this is about connecting the dots, right? The resource web or the resource audit, taking stock of assets and needs.
Exactly. So micro-win, #4 is creating that resource web, basically mapping out all the good stuff that's already there. Churches, ministries, leaders, maybe even financial resources in the area.
Like an inventory of what God's already provided. Okay.
Yeah.
Then micro-win, #5 is spotting the gaps. Where are the real needs that aren't being met by what's already there?
Where are those deserts really lacking? Is it leaders, training, funding? What specific things are missing that could actually make a difference?
And then micro-win, #6 is developing a bridge building strategy. How do we intentionally link the places with resources, the strongholds, to the places with needs, the deserts?
Yeah, the examples are things like setting up mentoring between leaders, providing targeted training, maybe allocating some funds or grants strategically.
Building intentional connections.
Right. And the other source frames it similarly. First, figure out what makes the strongholds successful, leadership, money, whatever. Then pinpoint the challenges holding back the deserts, lack of resources, cultural issues, maybe spiritual opposition. And then identify potential bridge builders, people or organizations who could actually make those connections happen.
Gotcha. I also noticed the suggestions for practical tools. One mentioned GIS mapping software, which sounds kind of advanced, but the other said even a simple spreadsheet could work.
Yeah, the key isn't the complexity of the tool, it's the act of visualizing it. Seeing the resources and needs laid out helps you think strategically.
Makes sense. And they stressed accountability too, sharing this map or audit with trusted friends or advisors. That feels important.
Oh, definitely. Getting outside eyes on it, having people can ask good questions and keep you focused,
Yeah,
that's invaluable.
totally. Okay, phase 3, action time. Strategic deployment and adaptive learning, or just strategic deployment. This is about actually doing something, but also learning as you go.
Right. So microwin #7 is implementing that bridge building strategy you developed. But the advice is key. Focus on just a few key initiatives first. Don't try to boil the ocean.
Yeah, start small, get some traction. That makes sense. The microwin #8 is about tracking progress, ongoing monitoring and evaluation using actual metrics, like how many people are being reached, are disciples actually being made, is the community changing in tangible
You
ways?
need to know if what you're doing is actually working,
Right,
objectively.
right, which leads straight into microwin #9, adapting the strategy, being willing to tweak things, change course based on what you're learning from that monitoring. It's not set in stone.
Exactly. It's a flexible learning approach, not a rigid blueprint.
And the other source's framing really backs this up. Make a concrete plan to move resources from strongholds to deserts. Identify even one specific action you can take to help a desert area volunteer, donate, pray intentionally, and, importantly, connect with other groups doing similar work. Collaborate.
Yeah, breaking it down again into those manageable, actionable steps. And I really liked that they included energy management in this phase.
Oh, yeah.
Prioritizing self-care, your own spiritual life. This kind of work takes energy. It can be draining. You've got to sustain yourself for the long haul.
Good point. And mindfulness, too, staying present, discerning. That feels like a reminder to keep listening, right? To God, to the context.
Exactly. Staying sensitive to God's leading and just the unique vibe and needs of each specific place.
Okay, let's zoom out again for a second. The sources also talk about defining growth itself from a kingdom perspective. It's clearly not just about counting heads, is it?
Not at all. They really stress holistic transformation. They map out different dimensions.
Yeah.
Evangelism and conversion, obviously that's part of it.
Sure.
But then just as important is disciple making and genuine spiritual formation, that deep internal change in people.
Right, going deeper than just a decision. And then there's community transformation,
Yeah.
seeing biblical values actually start to change the wider society.
Yeah.
Justice, compassion, reconciliation, tangible stuff.
And leadership development, raising up new leaders from within those communities, super important. And finally, multiplication and expansion, which should happen naturally if the other areas are healthy.
Okay.
But yeah, the sources seem to really focus on that deeper disciple-making spiritual formation piece and the community transformation aspect that suggests a really mature view of what growth looks like.
So if we put this geographic lens back on,
Yeah.
what are some key roadblocks to achieving that kind of holistic growth?
Well, one big one is what you could call blind spots and uncharted territories. It's this tendency we have to focus our energy and resources on places we already know, places that feel comfortable, maybe places that are already doing well.
While neglecting areas that might be needier or harder, even if the potential impact is huge there.
Exactly. Our vision gets kind of limited by our comfort zones.
Yeah.
And that links to resource misallocation, pouring investment into already flourishing areas while the underserved spots get left behind, which just makes the gap wider.
Creates an uneven playing field, spiritually speaking.
Pretty much. Hinders the overall growth across the whole region.
And that cultural insensitivity and contextual blindness thing comes up again here too, right? Trying to force a one-size-fits-all model everywhere.
Yeah, it's just not going to work long term.
Yeah.
You end up with programs that don't connect, maybe even alienate people because they don't respect the local culture.
Creates barriers instead of bridges. And the lack of collaboration, those network gaps, that clearly holds things back too.
Oh, for sure. When everyone's in their own silo, you miss huge opportunities. Shared learning, shared resources, just a more unified punch. You lose all that potential synergy.
Right. And finally, we just have to acknowledge, don't we, that sometimes there's real spiritual opposition and resistance that's stronger in certain places.
Yeah, you can't ignore that spiritual dimension. It's part of understanding the unique challenges you might face in different parts of the discipleship terrain.
Okay, so wrapping this up, this whole idea of looking at discipleship through a geographic lens, it's not just theoretical, is it? It really feels like a practical, intentional way to maybe break through stagnation and see real, meaningful growth happen.
Yeah, it's about getting beyond the surface level, really trying to understand the deep context, the opportunities and the obstacles in different places, and then being smart and strategic about connecting the resources you have to the needs you see.
So maybe the thought to leave everyone with is this. Think about your own discipleship terrain, whatever that means for your neighborhood, your city, your network. Where are the strongholds, the places full of life? And where are the deserts, the areas that seem dry or lacking?
Hmm.
And just ask yourself, what's one small, intentional step you could maybe take, even today, to start building a bridge between those areas? It's kind of an invitation, isn't it, to look at your world with fresh eyes and maybe a more strategic heart?